Now you both talked about the pandemic and how it affects the stories that are coming to the table, the stories that you're bringing to the table. But the other difficult balance here is one of tone and one of emotion. And
Oh,
you have a great responsibility. You've both got large swaths of your respective provinces tuning in during a time where we're all feeling a certain degree of stress, unease, worry. People are turning to CBC because they want to be entertained, but they're also tuning in to find out what's happening next in this really crazy roller coaster ride. Tell me a bit about balancing the tone and how you do this. It must be so difficult. Jonathan.
yeah, I've ever, so at the beginning of the pandemic, I was in Windsor working for the regional afternoon show, which covered Southwestern Ontario. And uh, it was, I mean, wall to wall COVID every second, of the show, because it was just such an unprecedented situation, right? We use that word unprecedented pretty much every day, right? Multiple times. And that balance is so important because everybody was getting tired of just of the constant barrage of information, whether our listeners and ourselves. So we keep that in mind of sort of balancing, what's happening and in terms of the pandemic, but also with other stuff that's has nothing to do with the pandemic. I mean, frankly, everything we talk about has to do with the pandemic because the pandemic touches every part of our lives. So even like the lightest story, like I do a food column every week on the show, and we talk about how the pandemic's affected, say, the farm or the restaurant or whatever, right? So it is part of every story we do. Like, you can't avoid that, but we do when we're programming our show, trying to figure out what stories are going to go where. We do want to give listeners sort of a release, as well as sort of the intense stuff as well. So it is important for us to maintain that balance. But this is a weird time, and the fact that one story is just that affects every aspect of everything is there. You can't avoid it, so we can't ignore it. But it's certainly a balancing act, trying to figure that out.
Julia, tone on the job during COVID.
At the start, I think I was very sincere in terms of my own curiosity about the science around COVID, and we were lucky enough to have some very dynamic speakers from universities that are based across Quebec who were one of the people who's working on the vaccine is at Université Laval, and we talked to him about different vaccines in the past, and we knew he was compelling and not condescending and could talk about it in the right tone. So finding the right guests to help people understand things has been absolutely key. Someone you want to listen to, someone who grabs your attention and right away wants you to understand as much as possible. So the educational side of it, I think we've really done a good job. But as Jonathan was mentioning for his food column, like, you could probably reflect people ordering in food and the way that people are eating in different ways during the pandemic, and the positives and the negatives. Some people are being careful. So you can probably hear my 4-year-old squawking in the background. But the tone, for me at least, I'm very transparent in my voice. If a guest is telling me a terrible story of their experience with COVID, of not being able to see their mother who is dying, and I will reflect that in my tone. I will say to the listeners, I'm so sorry for your loss.
Yeah.
And I will mean it, because I'm talking to a human, and not just the human I'm interviewing, but I'm relaying that to the audience. If I'm coming back to some of the examples, Jonathan was talking about the need for levity. I think one of the nicest interviews I had probably in April was an interview with Heather O'Neill and Patrick Watson, and getting to talk to them about poetry, and they make really almost ethereal art and really poetic, and getting to talk about how the need for poetry has been even more exacerbated by the pandemic. Like, people are looking for meaning in books and in art in ways that they weren't necessarily looking for it before. So instead of just booking an artist because they're touring through your city and you can have them in studio, you got to think of different ways to bring in arts and culture without it just being, you've lost all your income because you were a touring artist. That sucks for you. You got to find ways to share music, to share art, and to remind listeners that there is still beauty in the world among all the chaos.